I do know that, what happened last year, and there's a lot of reasons, fell short of our standard. And our guys understand that extremely well. And I think they're very motivated, like Kyle said, to do everything and be very intentional.
It's time to go to work.
The San Francisco 49ers are frankly a team with a lot to prove in this upcoming 2025 season. And in this NFL season preview for the 49ers, we'll be asking, will the San Francisco 49ers bounce back this year? We know the success that they've had in the past 5 to 6 seasons, making Super Bowls 54 and 58, but ultimately falling short of reaching that goal, having a 10-point lead in the second half in Super Bowl 54, but still losing that. And then with a rejuvenated and kind of revised roster with Brock Purdy at the quarterback position in this second season, falling short against the Kansas City Chiefs in overtime. And last season, in a word, sucked. It dealt with a lot of injuries. Christian McCaffrey only played 4 games after dealing with things like Achilles tendonitis, which was actually worse than what people speculated going into the season. Brandon Ayuk got injured during the middle of the season after receiving a contract extension during the offseason, which was one that consisted of him holding out before ultimately signing a new deal. Deebo Samuel played his last season with the 49ers last year, and then the 49ers traded him for a 5th-round pick to the Washington Commanders, and they really did a lot of that. That was honestly the first of a lot of turnover that they had in their roster. In a surprising move at first, the 49ers, they released fullback Kyle Juszczyk, who has been a huge plug-and-play guy for them, not only at the fullback position, but also utilized in different tight end sets. But they ended up re-signing him on a new 2-year deal, but he was the only player that the 49ers departed from, but ultimately came back. You look at key players in their defense the previous years, and Dre Greenlaw, who got injured in Super Bowl 58 and returned at the end of last year, but didn't necessarily get into a rhythm. Granted, the 49ers had a bad and tumultuous season. Dre Greenlaw, he ended up signing with the Denver Broncos on a 3-year, $31.5 million deal with Denver. And then in addition to that, 49ers safety Talanoa Hufanga signed also with the Denver Broncos on a 3-year, $45 million deal. So the Broncos, they were big spenders there, and they ended up acquiring 2 key defensive players that the 49ers had for a good amount of time, a part of their core. They really had to assemble a lot of moving parts on defense through the draft, where they drafted, honestly, some good weapons, particularly for the defensive line, that can be integral to their future, and also complementing a player like a defensive end and Nick Bosa, who's one of the best pass rushers / defensive players in the league overall. With the 11th overall pick in the first round, the Niners drafted edge from Georgia, Mykel Williams, who was looked as one of the best defensive players in this draft, and that was a really good pick. A lot of people didn't know necessarily the strategy of the 49ers going into the draft, particularly in the first round, and it seemed like they did BPA, best player available, or at least the best player on their board. Williams had 14 sacks in 3 seasons at Georgia, which certainly doesn't rank as the best in terms of the prospects who were in the draft, but there's a combinations that lead to that. But he did have 26 pressures last season in 2024. He had 5 sacks as well in 12 games, and even played through an injury last year in a high ankle sprain, in addition to also having 8.5 TFLs. So Mykel Williams is definitely going to be able to help in the pass rush, potentially on the opposite end of a Nick Bosa. And then a really good and underrated pick that I like that the 49ers made in the second round at the 43rd pick overall, drafting in Alfred Collins, defensive tackle from Texas. Played a lot of 4 technique while he was at UT, but I think in this 49ers defense under Robert Saleh, who likes to utilize a 1-gap type of defensive line, and also in the secondary having a cover 3 type of defense, I think that Alfred Collins at the defensive line position will probably be used a lot as a 3-tech, a run stopper, and really clogging A and B gaps against opposing offensive linemen to help stop the run, and at times create havoc and pressure in the pass rush. Last season he had 18 pressures at UT, and also he had 1 sack. So like I said, he's not necessarily the most dynamic pass rusher, but he adds another element at that defensive line position, another young player alongside Mykel Williams who can help be disruptive to that defensive line that's really getting rebuilt. And I think a coordinator like Robert Saleh, who was just a head coach for the New York Jets, him returning to the 49ers as defensive coordinator is going to be huge for those 2 players. And Saleh's final 2 seasons as defensive coordinator for the 49ers before he took up the head coaching job for New York Jets in 2021, in the season that they went to the Super Bowl in Super Bowl 54 that they lost to the Chiefs, they had the 2nd total ranked defense that season, that finished 6th in the league for forced turnovers and 4th in sacks. And then in the 2020 season, where that was a bad season as well, they missed the playoffs and things like that, that was a draft that ended up leading them to ultimately drafting Trey Lance. And I want to talk about this real quick before I go back to Robert Saleh. Brock Purdy didn't end up having the success story that he has had, being a more than serviceable quarterback for that team, and now recently this offseason signing a 5-year, $265 million contract extension. If Brock Purdy didn't become that, I'm not sure Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch would have been here still, because that drafting of Trey Lance was not great. I know he played good in that preseason game. I'm not going to roast him while he had a really good game, but bro, Brock Purdy did help save a lot for this 49ers franchise. But anyways, going back to Robert Saleh, as I mentioned, in the 2019 season when they went to the Super Bowl, they had the 2nd total ranked defense, and then in 2020, even though that season they had a 6-10 record, they still still ranked 5th overall in terms of an overall defensive perspective. He's been able to show that he can create great defensive schemes. He did that with the New York Jets as well. Even though they weren't great cohesively as a team, he still was able to implement a stout defense with players like a Quentin Williams on the defensive line, Sauce Gardner, CJ Mosley, all different types of players with talent on that Jets team that I think that he can equally form a rapport and develop some of these guys on the defensive line and on the defense overall with the 49ers, including a Nick Martin, linebacker out of Oklahoma State who they drafted in the 3rd round, who in ways could have the opportunity to replace a player like a Dre Greenlaw. What does all of this that I'm saying mean though? Do I think that the 49ers will bounce back this season? Well, stay tuned for the rest of this video. But I will certainly say that you cannot count this team out, not only from the pedigree of the team and the coaches, but they still have a lot of talent on the roster. Also, another situation to monitor with the 49ers is wide receiver Juwan Jennings, who has certainly been solid as a type of wide receiver 3 in the Kyle Shanahan offense. He wants another new contract extension or seeking a trade. He just last year in 2024 signed a 2-year, $15.39 million contract extension, but apparently wants a new deal and a pay grade after having a season with 77 receptions for 975 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns. Certainly a really productive year, almost having 1,000 receiving yards, which I can see his argument for. But right now he has something like a calf strain as well too, and he probably is the wide receiver 2 on this roster, but I'm not sure if the 49ers or John Lynch are willing to give him another deal after just giving him one last year. But ultimately he will be a free agent after this 2025 season, so we'll see how things go there, but that's something to take notice of as well. Now, we still have a lot of questions about when a Brandon Ayuk will return. He is still on the physically unable to play list and hasn't been able to participate in training camp. They'll probably miss a few games and maybe might be back around that October point, essentially, according to reports from CBS. But that's a player that they need in the worst way for sure to be back, especially after losing a player like a Deebo Samuel, because for when he comes back, that'll be a target point for defenses to try to scheme away. They have a Ricky Pearsall going into his 2nd season. It'll be interesting to see how much of a jump or the type of impact that he'll have on the 49ers pass game in this upcoming year. And really the biggest wild card for me is Christian McCaffrey, because he just turned 29 years old, and we all know the Great Wall, the running back. A lot of people expect around that 29 to 30 age to be cooked, but we saw different anomalies like a Derrick Henry last season run for over 1,900 rushing yards, and he turned 31 years old this past January. Saquon Barkley, he's still relatively young. He just turned 28 in February, the day they won the Super Bowl. And with a Christian McCaffrey, you can make the argument that really Christian McCaffrey had almost an equally impressive year to a Saquon Barkley. And I know that Saquon Barkley, he had over 2,000 rushing yards and stuff like that too, but I think a lot of people forget with the time passing the type of year that McCaffrey had in the 2023 season, because a lot of people viewed him as being the MVP that season, in a season that had a Lamar Jackson when he only had 24 passing touchdowns and 7 interceptions, when a player like a Dak Prescott, who finished 2nd in MVP voting, led the league in passing touchdowns with 36 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. Christian McCaffrey arguably should have won it over both of those top 2 candidates, as he had an explosive season in 2023. He had 272 carries for over 1,400 rushing yards, scoring a total of 21 touchdowns, 14 rushing and 21 receiving, which ultimately led to him winning that Offensive Player of the Year award. And from a total yards perspective, I mentioned he had over 1,400 in the running game, but he also had nearly 600 receiving yards. So from an all-purpose yards perspective, Christian McCaffrey had over 2,000 yards, which in my opinion, I think was MVP caliber. But nevertheless though, will he be able to build upon that season after only playing 4 games in 2024, really not being able to have any of that juice when he was able to play in those games, whether it's because of the fractured O-line, sustaining injuries at times, Trent Williams missed some time, and just the season going as bad as it did? Will Christian McCaffrey be able to be a potential candidate for comeback player of the year? I think that's certainly in its possibility, and they're going to have a lot to deal with. We all know, and I just made a video about the Los Angeles Rams. Go check that season preview video out if you haven't already. Their division is not easy. There was 2 teams that won 10 games, the Rams and the Seahawks, and the Seahawks didn't even make the playoffs, but those are teams that are ultra competitive. You look at the Arizona Cardinals. The Cardinals swept the 49ers last season in the season series, and I know there's a lot played into that, but nevertheless, that's a fact right there. And then the Seahawks are always a tough team to play against as well, just overall because of their defensive scheme with a second-year head coach now and Mike McDonald and the type of personnel that they have. So I don't think it's going to be any easier. The Rams, they're favored to be one of the best teams in the NFC and the league overall. They were close to making the NFC Championship game. The 49ers are going to have to remind a lot of people of why they should still be one of the most feared teams in the league. And I have a lot of questions about how people are going to view Kyle Shanahan going into this season. He's heading into his 9th year as head coach after being hired in 2017. And as I mentioned, those 2 Super Bowl appearances, 4 total conference championship appearances. What is this season going to look like? I think a lot of people can acknowledge openly that Kyle Shanahan is probably a top 10 level coach. A couple of years ago in 2023, people probably would have argued that he's a top 5 level coach, but there's just been a lot of things and factors from an execution standpoint, like the 49ers not knowing the overtime rules in the Super Bowl, and just them at moments, even as a coordinator, as we all know, the 28-3 game when he was a Falcons offensive coordinator, they were still trying to launch out the football after being up by 25 points and ended up losing in that league. There's been a lot of questions about Kyle Shanahan from the outside world and in sports media, if he's able to get the 49ers over the hump, especially after losing 2 times in the Super Bowl against the same squad in a similar type of fashion. But with that being said though, guys, before we dive deeper into this San Francisco 49ers NFL season preview for the 2025 season, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe and turn on post notifications. Follow me on Instagram and X/Twitter at SwaggyRuss, at TikTok at SwaggyRuss2 for shorts, reels, and more content like that. Stay tuned for more podcast information that I'm going to be having, because all of these videos are going to be transcribed into wherever you get your podcast from, on Spotify, on Apple, wherever you get your podcast from. Stay tuned. I'll have more information on that soon. But we're going to have a podcast that consists of these videos as well simultaneously. So y'all stay tuned for that, guys. With all that out the way though, let's answer the question if the 49ers will bounce back this season. So I talked about how the 49ers, they had an awful season last year, finishing 6-11, but there were some small positives from that season ultimately. In 2024, they still ranked 4th in total yards with almost 400 per game, averaging 376.3 per game, and they were still able to put up points at a solid rate in different games, but their offensive line play had a lot to be desired, and we all know that they have Trent Williams, one of the best offensive linemen that we've seen at the left tackle position. Even despite being now 37 years old, he still plays at a good level, but he was injured some last year as he missed 7 games. As an offensive line overall in 2024, the 49ers ranked 13th, so that's not too bad in terms of a total league standpoint. And going into this season, they have the 12th ranked offensive line according to PFF, so similar type of level of offensive line. But besides the Trent Williams though, you can make the argument that this 49ers offensive line could be viewed as average. Besides Trent Williams at the left tackle position, they have a projected offensive line of Ben Bartch at left guard, Jake Brendel at the center position, Dominic Puny at right guard, and then Colton McKivitz at the right tackle position. And that line has some experience alongside of a Trent Williams, like Ben Bartch going into his 6th season, Jake Brendel at the center position going into his 8th year, and Colton McKivitz at the right tackle position going into his 6th season. But Dominic Puny, he was drafted by the 49ers in 2024 in the 3rd round, so he's going to be able to see some work and really be thrown into the fire in the 2nd year and see how things go. And hopefully for the 49ers perspective and for Brock Purdy, the offensive line overall is going to be able to sustain that 12th position or maybe even creep it to the top 10, which I think is certainly possible as well. And I found this very interesting. Look at the stats discrepancy with and without Trent Williams for Brock Purdy. So with Trent Williams, Brock Purdy has a passer rating of almost 108 with over 7,600 passing yards, 55 touchdowns, and 19 interceptions in those 32 games with a Trent Williams starting at left tackle. But without Trent Williams, in 8 games, Brock Purdy has essentially a passer rating of 94 with only 1,800 yards, 9 passing touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. So it's clear to see the type of impact that Trent Williams has at that left tackle position in protecting a Brock Purdy and is able to really seatbelt opposing defensive lines. So you need Trent Williams upright and healthy, and I know he's continuing to get older at 37, but he's still been really effective. You can make an argument that last year was more of a down year than it was in previous compared to like a 2023 season, but the difference is clear with and without Trent Williams for Brock Purdy. That directly impacts the running game as well too, because if you want to look at with and without perspective with a Brock Purdy and Christian McCaffrey, Brock Purdy, when Christian McCaffrey is in the lineup as well, he has an even higher passer rating of almost a 110 passing rating with over 6,200 passing yards, 47 touchdowns, and 16 interceptions with McCaffrey in the lineup. But without Christian McCaffrey, as we saw like a lot of last season, he only has a passer rating of 95.7 with a little over 3,200 passing yards, 17 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions. So these two players in McCaffrey and Trent Williams, they really play hand in hand with the success of a Brock Purdy, who a lot of people speculate as being a quote-unquote game manager, but he has played well in that Kyle Shanahan system in his 3 seasons so far, and going into his 4th year with a new contract being paid now $53 million per year, making him the 7th among NFL quarterbacks in terms of annual value per year standpoint on his contract. There's going to be pressure for him to perform, most definitely. They can't afford a season anything like last year. If anything, the minimum and baseline for the 49ers should be the wild card, and I think a lot of fans should expect that too, because before last season they made the playoffs in 2021, 2022, and 2023, as in 2021 they had a 10-7 record, making the playoffs as a wild card and making it all the way to the NFC Championship game. Then in 2022 they had a 13-4 record, also making it to the NFC Championship game that season as well. And then in 2023, as we all know, they made the Super Bowl but ended up losing. They were the 1 seed in the NFC and they had a 12-5 record. So this team has had sustained success. The only 2 truly bad seasons for this franchise, at least as of recently, was 2024 and the COVID year in 2020. I'm not going to flame Kyle Shanahan for his seasons in 2017 and 2018. Those were his first 2 years as head coach. So that was the beginning stages of this total franchise being rebuilt with him and John Lynch. With all that being said though, there is still a lot of continuity on this 49ers roster, starting off with a George Kittle who recently signed a 4-year contract extension with the 49ers worth $76.4 million, including $40 million guaranteed. And that's huge for a player who I think is the best tight end in the league, and he's getting paid like that as his salary ranks first in terms of all tight ends in the NFL right now. 31 and turns 32 years old in October, but he's playing at a high level still. Even despite last year being as rough as it was, he's still had a really good season, having 78 receptions for over 1,100 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns. And he showed no slippage at all. Throughout his 8 seasons, 4 of those seasons has seen him have over 1,000 receiving yards, and his career high with over 1,300 in 2018. I think that really solidified him at that time when he was younger. But even now, though, he's been the definition of consistent. And the only time when he hasn't necessarily had the greatest production is really been due to injury. And he still plays at a high level, even when limited. I think George Kittle signing a new contract extension there, being able to be not only the security blanket for Brock Purdy, but also being great as a blocker and a decoy in that offense, just really pays dividends to his roster. And he's already known as a 49ers great, so that helps too. But complementing that, the 49ers also signed Fred Warner to a new 3-year, $63 million contract extension, making him the highest paid linebacker in the NFL, and rightfully so. I think that most people view him as the best linebacker in the league. There's also the Roquan Smiths, the Bobby Wagners, the Mario Davises of the world, and a Zach Bond who emerged last year, but I still think that Fred Warner clears all of them respectfully. In 2024, he had 76 solo tackles, he had a sack, 4 forced fumbles, and 2 interceptions. And in the season before, in 2023, he also had 4 interceptions with a total of 132 tackles, 1 more tackle than he had last year in 2024. So he has had sustained success, huge playoff games, for example, like against the Dallas Cowboys, picking off Dak Prescott 2 times. So he's had a lot of moments to show that he is the best linebacker in the game, and it was huge that the 49ers were able to keep him and George Kittle in that same continuity on 2 new contracts. I think it's very important to mention that continuity standpoint because the 49ers had 11 departures in free agency, particularly ones that stand out that I already mentioned, Dre Greenlaw and Hufanga, both going to the Broncos. But a player like Travarius Ward, who signed with the Indianapolis Colts, he was a player in their secondary that was kind of key for them in the previous years. And then a lot of players like Jordan Mason, for example, who's a running back, and Elijah Mitchell at running back positions. Those are players for depth pieces in terms of that position after Christian McCaffrey in the depth chart. But I can argue a player like a defensive tackle in Javon Hargrave, who ended up signing with the Minnesota Vikings, that's no easy player to replace. And like I mentioned about Alfred Collins, you're hoping that he has a 3 technique on the defensive line, maybe even some 4 tech, is able to help immediately have a big role in that defense. But also Malik Collins, defensive tackle, was released. Leonard Floyd was also released. So there was a lot of turnover on this roster, and the reality of that reasoning for that turnover was because they had to build a team that had to be positioned to pay a quarterback and Brock Purdy to that new deal, which is reality. And to me, this team still has a lot of talent, and to be naive and say that, oh, the 49ers are going to be a team that will be competitive, but I don't see them making the playoffs, I think that's probably a bad take. Actually, I know it is, because this team, it's coached way too well, and now from just alone Robert Saleh returning at the defensive coordinator position, I think this team is going to be on fire on both ends of the field. And you can look at their schedule to even prove and emphasize my point even more, because they have the easiest strength of schedule in the league going into this 2025 year. The point I brought up earlier about their division being tough, that's going to be the reality of it. So I'm going to mention the division games. I wouldn't be surprised if every single team they played against in the NFC West they split a game with, because that's how really the margin is in terms of how tough these teams play against each other. But when you look at their schedule, as I said, it is the easiest ranked strength of schedule in the league. I think week 2 shows that alone. So in week 1 they play against the Seahawks. That'll be an intriguing game for sure. But week 2 they play against the New Orleans Saints. I think that should be a dub. They play the Cardinals in week 3. That'll be a tough game. They play against the Jaguars the week after. We'll see what the Jaguars consist of. I think it's very tough for me to judge this team right now. It comes down to a player like a Travis Hunter, how he's going to be utilized offensively and defensively, and for the offensive perspective of him complementing a player like a Brian Thomas Jr. But they should win that game. To play against the Rams, that's always tough. They play against the Buccaneers. That's not an easy game. And if you look at the game that the Buccaneers had against the 49ers last year, that came down to the absolute wire as well. That was a good win that the 49ers had last year in November over the Bucs in Tampa Bay, winning 23-20. But that'll certainly be a game that is one to watch as well, because that team is tough. And they're playing another NFC West team the following weekend, the Falcons. Definitely winnable as well too, but that team has a lot of talent in Atlanta, and they shouldn't be nothing to sneeze at as well. They play against the Texans in Houston. That certainly won't be an easy game. I think the Texans have a Super Bowl level type of defense, and that's not a crazy take at all. Look at Will Anderson Jr., Danielle Hunter, Derek Stingley, Lassiter, Jalen Petrie, a lot of different guys on that defense overall under D'Amico Ryans, who was formerly a defensive coordinator for the 49ers as well too. Could have some stuff up his sleeve against the 49ers. That's not going to be an easy game. But when you look at some of these other games, it's like, okay, I can see why they have the easiest strength of schedule. They play against the Giants, who have a good defense, but their offense a lot to be desired besides Malik Neighbors. Play the Rams again, then they play the Cardinals. 2 tough games in the division in back-to-back weeks. Then they play against the Panthers, the Browns, the Titans, the Colts. I mean, that's a 4-week stretch where they could go 4-0, and that could be really integral in terms of a playoff positioning standpoint, whether it's as a wild card or still trying to win the NFC West. Then they have the Bears and the Seahawks in their final 2 games. So I can certainly see this team going 10-7, maybe even 9-8. But even if if they were to go 9-8, you make the argument that could be enough to make the playoffs. It just depends on how these other divisions in the NFC East, the NFC North, how things go there, because those divisions usually have multiple teams that make the playoffs. But it wouldn't surprise me if the 49ers end up really bouncing back and having a season like they did in 2023 in terms of a total win standpoint, going 12-5 or being 11-6, 10-7. If I had to say an over-under in my perspective of what I think the 49ers will be, I would probably say my over-under for the 49ers will be at 10 games. And really Vegas agrees with that point, but even they have it up a little bit further, because in Vegas they have the total wins for the 49ers at 10.5 on the over-under. And like I said, I think it's around that area because this team is going to be improved. At 6-11, they had double-digit players miss games due to injury, and that always makes things very tough from a replacement standpoint, trying to add serviceable players on your roster to help fulfill the depth that's needed to be competitive. And ultimately they weren't able to fulfill that last year. But this season, I think that for every season that you have in NFL where your team is severely hampered by injuries, the next one you're usually back on track. You have a majority of your roster intact and healthy and whole. So that's certainly what the 49ers fans can hope for and pray for sure. I see this team bouncing back, but what does bouncing back truly mean? If you mean bouncing back in terms of being a Super Bowl contender, being a team that potentially makes Super Bowl 60, playing in their home stadium of Levi Stadium in Santa Clara, mind you, that would be poetic justice for this 49ers team after missing the playoffs last year. I'm not gonna go and say that yet, because you still have teams like the Eagles and the Lions and even the Rams in their own division. I think it's interesting to see how they match up against them in this upcoming year. I wouldn't be quick to put them over those three teams right now, but I certainly would say they should be in the mix, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if the 49ers make the playoffs this upcoming year. If you ask me if I definitively say yes or no to them making the playoffs, I would say yes, because like I said, they have the continuity in the roster still to play clean, and they've added some reinforcements in terms of getting younger too as well, so that always helps, providing a type of youthful energy. And like I said, I think Robert Saleh being back as the defensive coordinator, that's going to be a really good add for them, bringing in some previous continuity from a defensive scheme, even though it's some new players, but also some familiar players in that defensive scheme that's going to be there in 2025. So this 49ers team, I think that they'll bounce back in terms of being a playoff contender, being a team that could win a playoff game as well, make it potentially to the divisional round. But in terms of a team that makes it to the Super Bowl or makes it to the conference championship game, I wouldn't say so yet. But although a lot of people didn't think that in the 2021 season, and even under a player like a Jimmy Garoppolo, who is a definition of game manager, they were still able to make the conference championship that season and played a tough game, but ultimately lost to the Rams in a 21-22 NFC championship game, but coming close to that season making the Super Bowl. So you certainly can't count out the 49ers too much, but will they bounce back in terms of making the playoffs? Yes. Will they bounce back in terms of making the Super Bowl or being a Super Bowl contender? I don't think so, but they can easily prove me wrong because they've done it before in previous seasons. With that being said though, guys, let me know your thoughts and opinions on this 49ers team for this 2025 season. Do you see this team as a legit Super Bowl threat or candidate or a Super Bowl contending team, or do you view them similarly to me as a playoff contender for sure, but still not on the upper echelon level yet as they were in previous years? Y'all let me know in the comments down below. Or do y'all think that they are going to have a down season again this year? If that happens, that would be crazy, and certainly Kyle Shanahan would be on the hot seat. I would think so in 2026, but I don't foresee that type of situation happening, but only time will tell. And the NFL is one of the most unpredictable leagues in the world, so I wouldn't count anything out of the realm of possibility. But I think that the 49ers will make the playoffs in this upcoming 2025 season. Love you guys always. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe and turn on post notifications. Like I said, hit me up on Instagram and on X/Twitter at SwaggyRuss if y'all want to talk about anything NFL, NBA, sports related, pop culture related as well too. Stay tuned for more videos in this series, as next we'll be previewing the Arizona Cardinals, and then lastly, in a couple days after that, previewing the Seattle Seahawks, wrapping up the season preview series for the NFC West, and then we'll be shifting gears to the AFC West, where we'll be previewing the Kansas City Chiefs, the Chargers, the Denver Broncos, and the Las Vegas Raiders. So y'all stay tuned, guys. This is NFL season preview number 10. Still have 22 more to go, but this is going to be a great ride previewing every single team. And like I said in previous videos, if I haven't previewed your favorite team yet, by the time September rolls around, every team will be previewed in the NFL. So y'all stay tuned, most definitely. Love you guys. Keep Jesus Christ at the center of your lives always. He loves you and has great purpose for you guys. You are loved. You are chosen. You are here for a reason. Y'all keep being blessed. I love y'all. And stay tuned for more content. Keep being great and know that you matter. Peace.